So I wanted, before we get started, to let everyone know that I have a new podcast out, and it's called Meditations. If you like the Meditations segment of this current podcast, you'll like the Meditations podcast. It's nothing but 20 minutes of meditative sounds. And now, on with the podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off chocolate candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, 4th year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant.
Now, it's true that when you're out on the campaign trail and you start to get very eloquent about all the wonderful things you've accomplished, you can get yourself in trouble. I don't know if you ever heard the story about Teddy Roosevelt, and no matter what you may have heard, he did not tell me this story himself. About how once in a campaign he was giving a terrific old stem winder of a speech, and a heckler interrupted him very rudely. And this fellow in the audience kept yelling, "I'm a Democrat." Teddy finally just stopped cold and said, "All right, sir, why are you a Democrat?" And the fellow said, "Because my father was a Democrat, and my grandfather was a Democrat, and my great-grandfather was a Democrat." And Teddy went in for the kill. He said, "Well, sir, what if your father were a jackass, and your grandfather were a jackass, and your great-grandfather were a jackass? What would you be then?" And the fellow says, "A Republican."
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, June the 7th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, effective interpersonal communications, rules for retrogrades, the sovereign child, motivation, meditation, and rules for patriots. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Like all other contracts, wages should be left to the fair and free competition of the market and should never be controlled by the interference of the legislature. David Ricardo. What the great classical economist does here is remarkable in its prescience. He notes the similarity between wage manipulation and all other contract price manipulation. Over 150 years later, the concept of government-set contract terms would still be unfathomable in a market economy, yet wage controls by federal government fiat would gain a foothold. Ricardo's warnings are rooted in the consistency of first principles broadly applied. The setting of prices, including the price of wages, is best left to the two parties in the exchange.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now from the book Effective Interpersonal Communication, Method 16, Good Humor. This method is also a soft criticism technique, like the sweet sandwich method. You use it either when you want to complain about some unfairness someone has committed without making them feel hurt or angry, or you use it when you want someone to stop feeling angry over something you have done. You put your argument in front of them, but you do so in an amusing way so they don't, or are unable to, take offense. You neither raise your voice so as to appear angry, nor use words that may be considered harsh. Let's see an example of this technique in action. Dave is lying on the sofa. A table is set beside the sofa, on which is a glass. While lying down, Dave's hand accidentally collides with the glass. The glass flies from the table for a few inches and shatters on the floor. "Look at you," shouts Dave's mother. "You've broken the glass. What a clumsy young man you are." "Mummy, you know when you are near me I have more luck, so I thought I could afford to be a bit clumsy," replies Dave lazily. Here, instead of getting worked up, Dave uses the good humor method to lessen his mother's anger and get the situation under control. This way, Dave's mother is unable to come up with an angry reply, as Dave has pacified her emotions by indirectly praising the fact that her presence gives him luck. The greater part of her attention is now focused on how much Dave loves and values her. She loses the emotional momentum required to shout at or scold Dave. However, one thing needs to be paid special attention here. In being funny, you shouldn't go overboard. You should neither resort to sarcasm nor say things in a way that might offend the other person. You should only joke good-naturedly, meaning you should only joke in a way they find funny and not offensive. Otherwise, instead of enjoying a lighter mood, they will get even angrier than before, and a heated argument will begin. Look at the paragraph below. It's the same thing as Dave said above, but the wording is different. The wording completely changes the way the sentence is perceived by Dave's mother and ruins the whole point of the method. Quote, "Mummy, I just thought since you are here, I would be less likely to run into bad luck, so I thought I could afford to be a bit clumsy. I had no idea such a thing could still happen." Unquote. There are two main changes to this new statement. Firstly, the point that Dave got luck from his mother is presented as a wishful thought instead of an established fact. Secondly, the sentence, "I had no idea such a thing could still happen," sounds accusatory. It sounds like Dave is blaming his mother for not being able enough to give him luck, so it's not Dave's, but his mother's fault that Dave's hand hit and broke the glass. Wording is always important in any method of debate. You need to have a good vocabulary at your fingertips and know when to use what word or phrase. The best method can be ruined if you use incompatible or faulty wording. As we've seen earlier, humans have a tendency to get really defensive when they are criticized, and when that happens, all hope of them listening to reason gets flushed away. However, when you use the good humor method to argue with them and talk in a comical manner, what happens is that egotistical tendency humans have to reject all criticism as lies gets weakened. Your humorous way of bringing up your argument, so to say, dampens the normally hostile response to criticism. It is said that if you smile when you feel angry, your anger softens. Similarly, when you joke good-humoredly, when the other person is angry or about to get angry, their anger wouldn't be able to manifest in its full or extreme form. Their brain's emotion processing part gets confused between the two emotions and is unable to assess whether it needs to feel angry or joyous in the moment. In situations where you don't want to pick a fight, this technique is very helpful. It also gives you the reputation of being a good-natured person. For disputes involving a friend or loved one, this method is especially good. It can work also well on strangers, although in a slightly limited capacity. The good humor method helps in pacifying people and dissolving the tension in the air. It turns on an otherwise scary or potentially scary situation into a laughing matter. It gives us hope that there is still some kindness in the world, and it is possible to coexist without fighting all the time. During the time I was at school, one of my friends once started bullying another classmate. He was running after him, and the other guy was running from him, scared out of his wits. Normally, I was a reserved kid and avoided confrontations, but one of my friends had recently had a conversation with me regarding my confidence. He had asked me why I wasn't more confident, and when I told him I just couldn't make it, that was that there was something wrong with my nerves, he had said, but there's also something called confidence building. Though that sounded pretty tough to me at the time, owing to peer pressure, I thought that if this person is saying I'm not trying hard enough, maybe there's still some room left for improvement. Coincidentally, that friend was the same friend chasing after my other classmate right now. I felt bad for the other classmate, so I decided to stop my friend from bullying him. Also, I felt that if there was a time to be confident, this was the time, as he was the friend who had criticized me for not being more confident. Then he would have no reason to complain if I acted confidently. Therefore, there was no reason for me to be shy. I put my hands on the shoulders of the bullying friend and jumped and said in a friendly, jovial way, "Hey, what are you doing? He's our friend." I thought he would be relieved that I had finally achieved the confidence of a normal person. To my surprise, he was astonished. His eyes were popping out in disbelief, and he cried out loudly, "What happened to him? How's he become so confident?" This way, I used the good humor method to save my other friend from a scary situation because I felt I could do it. The good humor method is slightly similar to the beautify method in that you choose your words as well as tone are chosen in such a way to make the situation advantageous to you. The same idea, if presented differently, affects other people's psychology differently and makes them react differently. It targets the opponent's emotions rather than focusing on creating logical mind traps like some of the other methods, such as the politician's dodge and drag method, do. Unlike the mock method, it is not an aggressive method, but a rather peaceful and non-confrontational method. It makes fun of situations in a way that sounds polite and acceptable to your opponent, so rather than antagonizing your opponent, the good humor method makes him sympathize with you. And that was method 16, the good humor method. Next week, method 17, the flamboyant flatterer. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 36. Young retrogrades should be neither sheep nor wolves, but sheep dogs. Young men should be taught to fight according to the mantra, never start fights, but finish them. Being smart or proficient at debate is no longer good enough in 2019 America. The time for flabby, comfortable, conservative leisure is at an end. The battle of ideas is quickening to the point at which it will soon become an actual battle. Hence, our last few rules involve grouping and preparatory criteria, who and how to prepare. We are mustering to stand and fight, not only retrogrades, but all men of goodwill who may be counted upon. But first, retrogrades must make themselves worthy of a fight. Rocky did not fight Apollo without a rigorous training regimen executed over a grueling period of time. Radicals categorically avoid non-rigged exchanges of ideas where they cannot interrupt or yell because they are aware that they are fated to fail in contests of ideas. It was the radical Marx who said that the purpose of philosophy is not understanding the world, but changing it. The radicals do not care if their formulations are correct. They only care about power. This explains why they turn to displays of semi-force and outright force instead of learning from their errors in debate. Only good men heed their past errors. Radicals simply learn how to implement force, giving the flimsy appearance of righteousness to wrong conclusions. A retrograde must be able to stand down any radical when the eventuality of the radical's defeat in the battle of wits inevitably coaxes forth the violent response from him. While such a statement did not correctly modify the status of the world a decade or two ago, it is one of the final and most important rules for retrogrades. Prepare for battle. Hopefully the battle won't be necessary, but this hope for peace grows more foolish as each day passes. To this end, the retrograde must maintain physical fitness in order to maintain, rather to regain, the imposing male standard of the West. While not every man has the time or training or talent to become proficient in the martial arts, Virtually every man has 30 minutes per day to train at home with weights. That way, even a martially untrained retrograde can exercise an imposing presence in the public defense of ideas.
And that was Rule 36 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, The Sovereign Child. And I'm going to read the preface. I don't know if I did this before, but I'm going to read the preface instead of continuing on with the chapter that I was reading before, because basically all the chapters, with a few exceptions, are basically saying, let the kids do whatever they want. I mean, that's the theme. Let them stay up as late as they want, eat what they want, watch whatever they want, screen time-wise. Just let your kids act as though they are guests in a hotel. So, but the preface goes into explaining why the author, more of the whys, let's put it that way. So here's the preface. This book is inspired by a philosophy of parenting called Taking Children Seriously, a non-coercive parenting movement that was co-founded by Sarah Fitz Claridge and David Deutsch, and was prominent in the United Kingdom in the 1990s. At the time, Fitz Claridge was pursuing the radical idea that it was possible to raise a child with zero coercion. She familiarized herself with various schools of thought on children and parenting, but found that none of them fully measured up. Eventually, she happened upon an unlikely collaborator who lived in her city, Oxford physicist David Deutsch. Deutsch is a world-renowned thinker for, among other things, establishing the theoretical groundwork for quantum computing. In addition to physics, Deutsch was attracted to philosophy, and in particular the philosophy of Karl Popper. In subsequent years, Deutsch added to Popper's work in epistemology, personal identity, morality, and aesthetics, all of which are detailed in his two books, The Fabric of Reality and The Beginning of Infinity. Deutsch's views on personhood aligned with Fitz Claridge's intuitions, and the two of them started a movement promoting a radically non-coercive approach to parenting. Fitz went to conferences and met with parenting and schooling groups, and she organized a print journal called Taking Children Seriously that had thousands of paid subscribers at its peak. The movement lost steam in the 2000s, but the content of the journals remained online as a half-functioning web forum when I stumbled upon it in 2018, just in time for the birth of my first child. 6 years later, my wife and I have been applying this philosophy with all of our 5 kids. We consider ourselves enormously lucky to have encountered these ideas, and the purpose of this book is to share them with others. So I notice right there that they're not advocating, at least not at this point. They're not advocating. What they're doing is more subtle than that. They're sharing it. And because if they advocate, I think they realize that they're bound to get, it's a natural human resistance, tendency to resist, and that they will get a lot of resistance. Whereas if they say that they are just sharing this, then there's no reason for people to resist. What is taking children seriously? The simplest way to describe taking children seriously is to describe what it is not. Taking children seriously avoids the 2 questions that frame almost every other school of thought on parenting. 1, what are the necessary limitations, restrictions, or boundaries for kids? Where should the parent draw the line on what is allowed and disallowed? 2, how do parents enforce these lines, limits, and expectations? Should they use harsh words, positive reinforcement, timeouts, confiscations, bribes, or breathing techniques? Taking children seriously steps away from all of this. It has no interest in what the best rules should be or how to enforce them because it has no interest in rules. When most people hear this, their first reaction is to assume taking children seriously is a fancy version of complete permissiveness, a well-known and ancient parenting style otherwise known as neglect. Rest assured, taking children seriously is not neglect. Sounds like a little bit of self-consciousness, a little bit of doubt, maybe just a bit of shame there.
So what is it? Instead of focusing on rules, taking children seriously focuses on fostering understanding. And here we have understanding again. There's another book that deals with understanding us as good inside, that you can either be a person who is trying to be right or you can understand. So again, taking children seriously focuses on fostering understanding. Parenting is the process of supporting a child until they understand the world well enough that they can support themselves. What is the best way to foster understanding? To provide freedom and security for a person's creativity to discover how the world works. Rules limit freedom and hence understanding, and therefore impair the parenting project. This book is inspired by the themes in The Sovereign Individual by James Dale Davidson and William Rees Mogg. Unlike the self-sovereignty that Davidson and Rees outline, which requires huge society-wide innovation, the self-sovereignty we might unlock for children can take root in any home, anywhere, by anyone of any financial status. The sovereign child doesn't have to wait for anything except a curious parent. Chapter 1 begins with freedom around food, and then chapters 2 and 3 move on to sleep and screens. Chapter 4 takes an extended look at the problems with enforcing rules in general. Chapter 5 presents problem solving as the formal alternative to rules. Chapter 6 addresses the counter-arguments. Chapter 7 presents various additional applications of the philosophy to daily life. Chapter 8 takes siblings seriously. Chapter 9 offers ideas for shifting from rules-based parenting to problem-solving-based parenting. Chapter 10 presents the philosophy of knowledge, the epistemology that underlies the entire book. Readers who prefer to start with the foundations are encouraged to begin here. Chapter 11 closes the book with an expansive view of parenting in the ancient past and distant future. Disclaimer. Above all things, my parents wanted to raise happy kids, and they wanted our childhood to be better than theirs. They both came from close families, but they were bothered by some features of their upbringing and vowed to make improvements for us. They succeeded spectacularly, and I grew up proud of my family and our norms around freedom, autonomy, and standards for character. I couldn't be more grateful. And yet, here I am writing a book that criticizes staples of our upbringing like rules, chores, and discipline. I worry that my parents will conclude that I regard my childhood as bad. Absolutely not. There's no final best way to parent, but there is improvement, and that is what matters most. My parents were very intentional about making progress, and they often talked with my brother and me about the challenges of doing better for us than their parents did for them. Within their lineage, they probably tried the hardest to improve their kids' lives, not just materially, but psychologically. I love my grandparents, but I doubt they gave it much thought, and I doubt their ancestors did either. My parents took a gigantic step forward. This book is the opposite of an indictment of them or any other parent trying to make things better for their kids. Effective criticism requires clarity and concision, and for that reason, the arguments in this book are presented directly without preamble, acknowledging that they are just guesses, might be wrong, and are not meant to be hurtful. Instead, readers are asked to keep this disclaimer in the back of their minds and append it to any argument in this book that reads like a personal attack. Lastly, I am a practicing medical doctor, but nothing in this book should be considered medical or psychiatric advice. And that was The Sovereign Child by the preface of The Sovereign Child by Aaron Struppel. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of motivation.
Where is the wealthiest place in the world? Do you know? It's the graveyard. Because in the graveyard, you will find inventions never invented, businesses never erected, songs never sung, books never written, ideas never nurtured, people never realized. Because they never prioritized their dreams. They never made them important enough. The things that are the most important to you are the things that get done.
I need you to reevaluate what you're prioritizing in your life. Are the things you're doing each day the things that are going to move you forward in life, lead you to a happier, healthier, more fulfilling life? Or are you wandering around distracted, caught up in the noise and chaos of social media, news, or what's happening around you?
Your focus, your attention is a laser. And what you point that laser at is what will grow and increase. So I need you to focus on what you are focusing on. Be aware of how you are using your attention and direct it towards where you want to go in your life.
You are where you are because of who you are. And if you're going to get somewhere else, you're going to have to change something. I don't care what happens in your life. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care where you are. Every single day you wake up, if you're going to have energy, if you're going to have passion, if you're going to have drive, every day you wake up, you got to start with that vision. Every day when I wake up, people say, why are you so excited? Because I have a mental picture of where I want to be. I have a mental picture of what I want to do. And even when I was in that abandoned building, I saw that I would not be in an abandoned building forever. And I was homeless once, now I own 2 homes. Because although my circumstance was homeless, my vision wasn't. The first level to success in life, the very first level, is you seeing it. Like it's clear to you. You know exactly what you want. You know exactly when you want it. You know exactly what it tastes like. You know what it look like. Before you really blow up, and you get success, you literally have it in the palm of your hand without having it. What does your dream look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What do you want in your health? What do you want financially? Like, how much money do you want to make a year? How do you want to live? Stop just waking up like an accident. What do you want? And then once you find out what you want, spend the rest of your natural life waking up and going after it. Look at your belief system every single day and stick with it. Don't rush the process. Trust the process. Don't rush the process. Trust the process. Don't rush the process. Trust the process. Stop looking for affirmation. Stop looking for somebody to pat you on the back. And you just get up on Monday and grind. And get up on Tuesday and grind. And get up on Wednesday and grind. And get up on Thursday and grind. And get up on Friday and grind. And if you grind, no days off, no holidays, no snow days, no weekends off, no birthdays. You heard me. If you keep grinding and you stay persistent and you locked in, one day you're going to wake up and you're going to be exactly where you dream you to be.
Because it's easy to say, I want to be this, I want to do that. Hey, I want to be significant. Hey, I want my life to matter. Hey, I want to be a millionaire. Hey, I want to drive a fucking Lamborghini. But unless your actions on a daily basis reflect that goal every single time, every single move, every single fucking second that you're awake, your goals aren't really your goals. You're just full of shit.
Because if you really want it, nothing would stop you. All of the silly things that happen that we let slow us down is related to our lack of hunger and desperation. So how desperate are you for what you want?
Everybody wants to wait and put off the things they truly want in their lives for tomorrow, the mystical place where 99% of dreams go to die. It's, oh, well, you know what? I didn't eat that much today. It's okay. I'll wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be there. No, tomorrow isn't going to fucking be there.
Tomorrow. Ain't no such thing as tomorrow. We only got today. What I've learned about the greats is that they understand it's a sense of urgency that once the clock goes out, it's a W or an L. You either win or you lose. There's a sense of urgency. You don't have as much time as you think you do. And so you got to pick up the pace. You walking too slow. Pick up the pace. You moving too slow. Pick up the pace. You don't have a lot of time. You only got 24 hours. So all of your energy needs to go into your goal. Why? Because I love myself too much to get distracted. I love myself too much not to execute. I need you to stop just randomly letting stuff happen to you. And I need you to take over your life. And a schedule is about bossing your time.
The secret is to make a plan, execute the plan, come obsessed with the plan, and make it your entire life from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed for 20 fucking years. It takes dedication, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes obsessive, ridiculous amounts of effort. I get sick and tired of people telling me how bad they want it, yet their actions don't back up that statement.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a little bit of meditation. Thank you. It's Saturday, and there is a controversy, whatever, going on downtown LA or near downtown LA, and there's some protesters and conflict between the advocates of illegal immigration and ICE and law enforcement. And there's somebody from ABC or Eyewitness News, Channel 7, from ABC covering it. And this is a little blurb from what they're talking about.
Aside from, again, a few of these stragglers who are, looking for trouble or looking to express themselves in any way, whether it's, peaceful or otherwise, if the law enforcement, you have to ask yourself, if the law enforcement wasn't in place here, would everybody just go home at this point? At least it's a question. But right now, as long as that large law enforcement presence remains on the streets here, you have people who are essentially provoked. They feel threatened.
And what they're doing is called determinism. They're saying that nobody has free will, and that they are forced to do what they do by powers beyond their control. And in this particular case, he's taking the side of the people that are pro-illegal immigration. And he is saying that they have been, and you heard him literally say they've been provoked, that the police department, if they would simply go away, then the protesters actually these are violent, and they're not activists, they're not protesters, they are advocates, and they're advocating for illegal immigration and illegal immigrants. There are also a great number of criminals whose interest is not in peaceful political protest or legal political protest, but simply to commit crimes and get away with them. They use their free will to go out and commit crimes. Because in the shoot, you could see where a car had been set on fire. The other problem with determinism is that you can make the same argument about law enforcement. They say, well, if law enforcement wasn't there, then these people that are advocating for the illegal aliens wouldn't have to show up. They felt that they were provoked. But on the other side of it is law enforcement was provoked. Law enforcement wouldn't be here if they hadn't been provoked by powers beyond their control. The law enforcement, particularly ICE agents, are trying to do their job removing illegal aliens, especially ones that have been convicted, they have deportation orders, etc. And it is the advocates that are doing whatever they possibly can to interfere with that. And if those advocates would simply go home, then there wouldn't be a problem. Then there would be no friction between law enforcement and the advocates, and everything would be okay. But people rarely that advocate determinism rarely look at that end of things. They claim that big tobacco is the villain and forces people to smoke, that nobody would smoke if it wasn't for big tobacco and their commercials and other inducements to smoke. But who forces big tobacco to go out and induce people to smoke? Perhaps the government, perhaps advocates. So, but they don't look at that. Determinism either exists for everybody, everybody's forced to do what they do by powers beyond their control, or it works for nobody. So you got to remember that. Now, in this situation, you're going to hear it from people, your relatives, etc., that are going to pick this up and say that, well, these people feel provoked. It's an arbitrary claim. He doesn't know. He's in a helicopter. How would he know what these people feel or don't feel? Okay, so it's an arbitrary claim. It's not true. It's not false. It's arbitrary. So I can, if somebody tells this to me, well, ICE provoked these people, I can just as easily say, no, they didn't. And so what I'm doing is countering his arbitrary claim with an arbitrary claim of my own. Okay, now what I'm doing by countering him is putting him in the position of put up or shut up. Either prove to me, to my satisfaction, that law enforcement is the provocateur here, or withdraw your claim. So more than likely they will just stare at me, because that's what these people usually do when I counter their claims, is they just stare at me. They don't know what to do. And then if they bother to come up with some kind of, let's say, a piece that they say, well, no, there's a study, or there's a videotape, or you should go look at it. I always tell them, I've already looked at it. You need to look at it and keep looking at it until you figure things out, until you get your mind right. And that ends the conversation right there. So again, to cover this, what this reporter is talking about is determinism. And again, he's supposed to be a news reporter. All he's supposed to be talking about is what, where, when, how, who, and how, right? When he starts talking about cause and effect, he's now involved in analysis. When he makes a value judgment about that cause and effect, he's now involved in commentary. So you see how all of this that's supposed to be news is now getting all jumbled together into news, commentary, and analysis, and really it ends up being nothing more or less than entertainment for the purpose of getting ratings and profits. So non-profit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
The economy remains fairly strong. The people that are worried about the hard data getting really soft, this report did not suggest that, and that's a positive.
139,000 new jobs added to this economy is great for the American people. President Trump, under his leadership, invested in this. We're seeing it month after month.
We will pass a reconciliation bill. It's going to be different than what the House passed. We get the opportunity of having more time to look through a 1,000-page bill.
But the reason that Elon Musk is criticizing the bill is because it doesn't cut spending enough. So what are we saying now, Democrats? That you, the Democrats, are on the warpath for more spending cuts. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Elon Musk, let's be blunt, has acted like a petulant teenager with an itchy Twitter finger over the past couple of days. Musk does not live in the real world. The real world is where Donald Trump lives.
Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine. We take a walk. The sun is shining.
I thought this was a very inventive song. I really like this. Good Day Sunshine. It's got a rhythm to it. Love it. And, of course, I am a Beatles fan. 11 o'clock Eastern Time, Friday, June 6th. The latest on the feud between President Trump and Elon Musk. The White House tells Fox there will be no phone call between them today. As for Tesla's stock, it plunged yesterday. Modest recovery today, but it is back up 7%, above $300 a share. We have a live shot for you. This is Trump's Tesla that he bought from Elon Musk on the driveway of the White House there. Bought it from Musk last month. We're told that Trump will sell it or give it away. To the markets. Earlier today, the S&P 500 crossed the 6,000 mark for the first time since February the 26th. It's still there, 6,004. The rally holds all around. Show me big tech. I'm pretty sure they're all in the green. Yes, they are. Alphabet, Amazon, Nvidia, Apple, and Microsoft. That's a new high for Microsoft at 470. The yield on the 10-year Treasury right around, or getting closer, I should say, to 4.5%. It's 447 right now. And now this. Karine Jean-Pierre is very lucky. Just as she faces a mountain of ridicule and criticism for dropping out of the Democrat Party, along comes the Trump-Musk public feud. She vanishes from the headlines. She and the Democrats got a reprieve. It won't last because KJP is a central character in covering up Biden's decline. That's a subject that is not going away. Unfortunately for her, she has a track record of denying the obvious truth.
Anyone in the White House hiding information about the president's health or his ability to do the job day to day?
Absolutely not. He is as sharp as ever. There's been no cover-up. I want to be very clear about that.
Soon as the news of the book and the party switch came out, several White House staffers came out with withering criticism. She was always badly prepared, they say, quick to anger, and required a lot of coddling to get her through the job. Even the media is turning on her.
This is just all an attempt to sell books, and that is what the general consensus is right now.
There's something called loyalty, and that you should not go out and kiss and tell and kind of poo-poo your colleagues and poo-poo your Democratic Party that puts you on this pedestal.
As a Democrat myself, what I would rather see is people rolling up their sleeves. Like, you got a solution, bring it to the table.
In announcing her book, KJP talks about not being confined to boxes. Well, unfortunately, she was hired because of the boxes she could tick off: gay, black, female. Despite her performance in the job, she could not be fired. Even a former president is critical of the White House staff, of which she was very much a part.
But look at that debate, for example. Mm-hmm. What happened in the 10 days before his debate? And what were the White House staff thinking? He went to Europe and back twice, and then he went to California once. Yeah. And he was 80 years old. What the heck is he doing that for?
KJP should be saying a big thank you to Elon Musk. His tantrum distracted everyone. But it's temporary. The attention will come back as Biden's inner circle gets grilled in Congress. She will be pressed to come clean about her role in the final years of his presidency. But she'll sell a lot of books. Third Hour of Varney starts now.
And that was Stuart Varney, Nonprofit News Now. Thank you. Now, what does the phrase, "if you're explaining, you're losing," mean? This was said by Ronald Reagan, speaking of political campaigns. From the perspective of your audience, if you have to explain yourself, you come off looking desperate to convince. As a consequence, you lose the high ground. From a more philosophical perspective, if you have a clear conscience and strong conviction towards the positions you take, your values, truth, and direction, you don't need the opinions or consent of others. As a consequence, you don't need to explain yourself. However, if you yourself are not convinced of the validity and truth of your position, or you can't fully justify your choices, then you continue to expel words in an attempt to create the illusion of certainty. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now from a book that's called Good Inside. What's the opposite of understanding? For this argument's sake, it's convincing. Convincing is the attempt to prove a singular reality, to prove that only one thing is true. Convincing is an attempt to be right, and as a result make the other person wrong. It rests on the assumption that there's only one correct viewpoint. And then my question is this supposed to be convincing? Further, convincing has one goal in mind, being right. And here's the unfortunate consequence of being right. The other person feels unseen and unheard, at which point most people become infuriated and combative, because it feels as if the other person does not accept your realness or worth. Feeling unseen and unheard makes connection impossible. Understanding two things are true and convincing one thing is true are diametrically opposed ways of approaching other people, so a powerful first step in any interaction is to notice which mode you're in. When you're in one thing is true mode, you're judgmental of and reactive to someone else's experience because it feels like an assault on your own truth. As a result, you will seek to prove your own point of view, which in turn makes the other person defensive because they need to uphold the realness of their experience. In one thing is true mode, exchanges escalate quickly. Each person thinks they're arguing about the content of the conversation when in fact they're trying to defend that they are a real, worthy person with a real, truthful experience. And again, is this convincing? Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the next chapter of Rules for Patriots.
Chapter 4. Commandment 3. Never accept the premise of your opponent's argument. Premise is a word many Americans are not familiar with, and neither do they use it in their everyday speech. However, the premise is one of the most powerful weapons in political warfare. Master the art of the premise, and you will master your opponent. A premise is the assumption of an argument that is meant to justify the conclusion the one making the argument is hoping you'll come to. If one fails to establish the premise of his argument, one almost always fails to convince others of his conclusion. On the other hand, if one establishes a premise, one will more than likely get others to agree with his conclusion. For example, if the premise of the argument is over reproductive choice and not the sanctity of human life, then the conclusion will come down on the side of the premise accepted. If there's one thing the Republicrats are good at, it's accepting the left's premise on virtually everything. As a result, for too long we have argued with the left over the conclusion, e.g., big government versus small government, when we should be arguing over the premise, e.g., what's legal for the government to do versus what's illegal for the government to do. Thankfully, there were plenty of grassroots conservatives who have read the Constitution that could invade many of the town halls held by the ruling class in the summer of 2009 and attack their flawed premise. These town halls became a treasure trove of sound bites for talk show hosts like me, with the ruling class caught on tape saying all kinds of stupid and anti-constitutional things. This set the stage for the midterm uprising of 2010, when several Republicrats were defeated in primaries, and more than 700 Democrats nationwide were fired by the American people at the polls. This was all done in spite of the leadership of the Republican Party, not because of it. We had to drag the GOP leadership kicking and screaming across the finish line. While we were basing our arguments against Obamacare on the law of the land, the Republican Party establishment was relying on shallow talking points like, we can't afford it. It's tough to argue we can't afford it when the other side is arguing on behalf of every contrived class of victims in the culture. If you were a politician, would you rather be identified with Robin Hood or Ebenezer Scrooge? On the other hand, if you argue the legality of legislation rather than its supposed good intentions, the entire argument is reframed in your favor. Because if the basis for government action in our system is simply good intentions, then what can't the government do? Moreover, what or who determines which and whose intentions are good? Every despot and dictator believes his intentions are good, and alternative definitions for good intentions have led to some of the wickedest government in history. Our founding fathers knew this, so they accomplished a first in the history of mankind, a constitution that binds the jurisdiction and conscience of the state rather than the individual. Prior to our Constitution, governments issued legal documents to clearly define the rights of citizens and operated under the premise that all rights and privileges came from government. Our Constitution begins with the premise that our rights come from God, and that government's only role is to secure and protect those God-given rights. For example, since God grants all people the right to call on him, whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved, when their hearts are convicted to do so, our government has an obligation to protect your religious freedom. Another example might be, since God grants us the right to self-defense, our government has an obligation to protect and enforce the Second Amendment. The Constitution is a plainly worded, objective moral standard of self-governance. It is no more a living, breathing document than is the Bible, and it's no coincidence the same people who believe the Bible is open to their subjective whims believe the same of the Constitution. Once someone defies God's authority, defying man's authority becomes no big deal. We are not predicated on the rule of victims, but the rule of law. Our founders loathed the term democracy for a reason, because it has a penchant to devolve into mob rule. This is why they established a republic, where our elected officials are not our rulers or leaders, but rather our representatives and employees. Since their opportunity to govern comes only from the consent of the governed, we are in essence utilizing them as our proxies. And the power we have afforded them, we can take back and give to someone else if they're not doing the job we want them to do. Our founders read in the Bible where it says, "Do not pervert justice, do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly." We're not to be intimidated by someone of great wealth and influence, nor are we to be emotionally manipulated by the downtrodden. What we are to do is perpetuate a government where there is no caste system, but rather everyone is held accountable to the same standard, no matter their station in life, and everyone has an equal opportunity to pursue happiness. Another group of people once rose to power, promising their own government-imposed definition of fairness. They were called Bolsheviks. In America, we promise the freedom to exploit your God-given talent to its fullest potential, and you face the consequences for failure or reap the rewards for success. Now, which system would you rather defend? Let's take a look at several key economic questions facing the country right now for examples of not accepting the left's premise. I was once asked by a website to join an esteemed list of contributors, most of whom are smarter and more well-known than me, in an ongoing conversation about some of the hot-button economic issues facing the country. With folks representing the Cato Institute, Club for Growth, Stanford University, as well as names like Dinesh D'Souza, Grover Norquist, Star Parker, and James Taranto, having already answered the site's questions, I was wondering what it is I could possibly contribute to the conversation that hadn't already been said. That's when it dawned on me that often debates about the future of the country immediately jump to the conclusion of our worldview when we should be arguing the premise. For example, we argue for limited government when the real argument is why someone is for small government or big government. Drawing this distinction is more important than ever before, because there is a debate within conservative circles about whether limited government and freedom can occur in a vacuum apart from addressing the moral issues or the condition of the culture. And the answer to that question is absolutely not. You cannot have limited/self-government without first having a moral people capable of governing themselves. And you cannot have a moral people without the sort of spiritual awakening in a culture that preceded this republic in the first place. It's no coincidence the more we collectively turn our backs on our spiritual heritage, the more immoral the culture becomes, and thus the bigger the government gets. For if men will not be ruled by God, they must be ruled by other men. Otherwise, there's no higher authority we can call upon to settle our disputes and disagreements with one another. The more we need the rule of man, the bigger the government gets. The more we submit to the rule of God, the smaller the government gets. With this in mind, I decided to answer their questions from a worldview standpoint rather than attempt to discuss tactical economics with those who know a lot more about it than I do. If we cannot challenge the premise of the left's belief system, we cannot deconstruct it. And if we can't deconstruct it, we certainly will not be able to defeat it. Currently, we are not challenging the left's premise. We are venting about the conclusion/application of their premise. Read the questions and then my answers to get an idea of what it means to never accept the premise of your opponent's argument. First question: what causes an economy to prosper? Answer: the most prosperous economies are those that truly understand the role of government. As it is stated in our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, there is a God. Our rights come from him, and the only purpose of government is to secure and defend those God-given rights. To put it another way, government is to encourage, not do good, and punish evil. Of course, government in and of itself is not a moral agent, and usually inflicts the most horrors on humanity when it attempts to be. So it needs another institution to define for it what is good and what is evil. That is the role of the church and the family. These clearly defined spheres of jurisdiction between cultural institutions are what produce the proper balance of liberty and morality, thus allowing for the most prosperity. Next question: what role should government play in an economy? Answer: the biggest misconception is that we're having a debate about the role of government in America today, when we're really having a debate about what authority or moral ethic are we going to govern ourselves by. The answer to that question then determines the role of government. For example, cultures that abandon the Judeo-Christian moral ethic, as ours is currently doing, end up growing government because something must fill the God-shaped void. Justice, law, education, validation, charity, etc. in the society. And that something usually ends up being the state. As G.K. Chesterton once observed, when government removes God, government then becomes the God. Next question: what kind of tax system is most effective? Answer: the tax and monetary system that was in place in this country prior to 1913, which was prior to the confiscatory federal income tax and the printing of a fiat currency, that helped encourage the greatest growth of human freedom and prosperity the world has ever known. Since abandoning that foundation, we've increasingly become a debtor nation/people. I may have gone to public school and not the Ludwig von Mises Institute for Advanced Austrian Libertarian Economics, but even I'm smart enough to know to go back to what worked before. Question: how do high taxes on the wealthy impact an economy? Answer: every job I've ever had came from a rich person, so I'm not sure how punitively punishing the very people who provide jobs will create more of them. Question: what is the cause and solution to poverty? Answer: the greatest way to combat poverty is to first recognize what causes it in the first place: sinful human nature. Sometimes that sinful human nature manifests itself as a robber baron who exploits the community's natural and human resources, thus making it harder, if not impossible, for his fellow man to maximize his God-given talent so he can provide for himself and his family. Sometimes that sinful human nature manifests itself in the wrongful choices individuals make that put their livelihood and prosperity at risk. Either way, this is the reason why God gave the church the primary role of distributing charity in human society, because ultimately the church has the moral message to confront the evils that cause poverty in the first place. When an amoral agent like the state intervenes instead, the best it can do is apply a Band-Aid to a flesh wound. It can treat the symptom, but it lacks the prescription to become the cure. Then, after a while, it becomes an enabler of the very thing it's trying to fix, just like it is today. Question: what role do workers' unions play in an economy? Answer: human history has shown that whenever power is concentrated in the hand of a few, or just one, corruption is bound to take place regardless of the belief system of those or the one in whose hands the power lies. That's why historically unions played a vital role as a check and balance on unfettered corporate power. Obviously, unions have also struggled with the same fallen nature manifested as corruption that corporatists have. Nowadays, unfortunately, unions, particularly government sector unions, do not primarily serve the needs of their workers, but are more or less a funding stream and campaign platform for the Democrat Party. So while the union bosses have a seat at the table, the workers are worse off. Question: how does a minimum wage requirement impact an economy? Answer: how can a government know what the minimum wage should be? Can anyone even support a family on the minimum wage? Here is the reality. Real wages in this country have declined in relation to the rate of inflation/debt since these sorts of government schemes to contrive equality began. Our wages nowadays do not have the buying power in a consumer-driven economy they once had, which is one of the reasons we carry so much debt. Just about every major purchase a family makes these days is made on credit. These schemes are actually harming the very people they purport to help because they're operating outside the natural laws of economics. Let me give an example. Suppose a movie theater owner has calculated the job of popcorn attendant is worth $5 an hour based on his business model and the current job market. In other words, based on finite objective standards. However, the government comes in and mandates he pay a minimum of $10 an hour for that job instead, under the subjective guise of fairness. The movie theater owner doesn't just cut into his own profit margin to cover the increased cost out of the kindness of his own heart, but rather jacks up the price of popcorn to pass along his cost to the consumer. Now the market, tethered by competition, is no longer setting the price, but government artificially is. That sounds well and good until you and I go buy a popcorn the next time we're at the theater, and we're still making the same amount of money we were making before the price got jacked up. Since we can't go back to our bosses and demand a raise to cover our popcorn habit, right away our buying power is diminished by this government intrusion into a consumer-driven economy. Not to mention, so is the popcorn attendants, because on his night off, when he takes his date to the movies, he'll notice he's making more money, but now this date is costing him more money too. He's essentially being given the bill for his own minimum wage increase. And he'll notice the same thing at the restaurant he takes her to, and everywhere else where entry-level workers were given a completely contrived minimum wage increase. In other words, his minimum wage increase is at best a revenue-neutral transaction once the arbitrary consumer price increase offsets the arbitrary minimum wage increase he got from Uncle Sam. Meaning, at best, he'll break even, and most of the time, it's a loss leader. This partially explains why the explosion in government since 2007 has led to a reduction in American wealth to 1992 levels. We're buying goods and services at 2012 prices with a standard of living that is 20 years old. We have a saying on our radio show, why be in a hurry to be wrong? I know our willingness to immediately comment on things we actually haven't researched and analyzed frustrates some in this instant gratification world, but it also helps us to sleep well at night and avoid looking foolish, as the Huffington Post recently did. Headline said fast food workers are demanding a living wage of $15 an hour. Of course, how do we know that's actually a living wage? Why not demand $20 an hour, or $50 an hour, or $100 an hour? A full-time job that pays $15 an hour comes out to $31,200 a year, not counting overtime. Can you really live the American dream, own a home, own a car, send your kids to good schools, and then eventually college, one family vacation per year on $31,200? After all, the federal poverty line for a family of four is currently $23,550 per year, but I digress. Of course, never wanting an opportunity to play class warfare, outlets like the Huffington Post, owned by Arianna Huffington, who's got a net worth of $35 million, so of course she identifies with the plight of the downtrodden, were overly eager to report as fact analysis of McDonald's financials from an alleged University of Kansas research assistant named Arnobio Moralex. Moralex reported that if McDonald's immediately doubled all the wages of its employees, including the $9 million CEO, it would only have to raise the cost of a Big Mac by 68 cents and its dollar menu to $1.17 per item. This comes out to a measly 17% price increase. It all sounds well and good, of course, in magical thinking land, but there's one small problem. Moralex is full of shinola. First of all, you can't on one hand simply imply McDonald's is a greedy corporation that refuses to pay its employees a living wage and then fail to recognize that if McDonald's could get away with just arbitrarily raising their prices by 17%, they already would have done it. Wouldn't the greedy corporation you're smearing actually be bilking employees and customers at the same time if they could? Of course they would. Especially since customers pay into the business model, while employees are overhead that subtract from it. Hello, McFly? Anybody home? The reality is, just as employees want to make more money, so does the company. Employees would like to make $15 an hour instead of $7.50, And McDonald's would like to charge $10 per Big Mac instead of $3.99 as well. But if McDonald's isn't the federal government able to just print more money whenever it wants, that means McDonald's has to live within the natural laws of economics, which state you can't spend more than you have, and if you don't make a profit, you're out of business, and that means all the jobs are gone too. That simple application of common sense should have shown the Huffington Post that hitching its wagon to Moralex was a bridge to nowhere. But when thinking emotionally, common sense is in short supply. We don't have time to think for ourselves, mind you, when we're too busy reporting the story we want to be true, even if it's not. By the way, it turns out Moralex isn't a research assistant at the University of Kansas either. He's actually just an undergraduate student there. When it printed its correction story, the Huffington Post said they ran with the story without fact-checking any of Moralex's so-called data themselves. For example, the Huffington Post said prior to the publication, they asked Moralex if his analysis included franchises, and he said that it did. My translation, hey, this college kid told us what we wanted to hear, so we just took it all at face value. I wish my editors at places like USA Today would afford me the same courtesy when I submit a column. Instead, I routinely have to provide multiple sources for my assertions. By the way, it turns out Moralex didn't factor in McDonald's franchise business model, which accounts for more than 80% of McDonald's restaurants worldwide. Oops. Moralex also asserted McDonald's currently spends 17.1% of its revenues on labor, when in reality it's almost double that. Oops. Since many McDonald's franchises are owned by small business owners, the average annual cash flow for a McDonald's franchise is only $275,000, and the average franchise experiences 43% staff turnover each year. That means doubling wages would actually require layoffs. In addition, that's not even counting the impact of the Obamacare employee mandate on these small businesses for employees working more than 30 hours per week. Oops. Furthermore, the typical household consuming McDonald's has an average annual income of $60,000 a year or lower. Since at least 1/3 of the cost of increased wages would be passed on to customers, you're not promoting a living wage, but really you're waging war on the middle class. Oops. Now, I give credit to the Huffington Post for running a thorough correction, but the truth is this was an unnecessary hit to its credibility. All they had to do was look at what their owner does to maintain her wealth to realize they were being scammed. Final question. Why do people disagree about the truth? Answer. Without an agreed-upon fixed standard, everyone becomes wise in his own eyes. Everyone believes their truth, which means somebody's truth isn't true. The fixed moral standard that once served this country well and made it the freest and most prosperous nation on the planet was the Judeo-Christian moral tradition. Since we have abandoned it, the culture has become more immoral, government has grown uncontrollably, and many once treasured institutions and associations in this country have become corrupted. That pretty much settles the argument on what truth is actually true as far as I'm concerned. The question is whether or not there is enough humility remaining in this culture to admit we've deviated off the proper path and ask for directions back to the main or narrow road. Now, after listening to my answers to those questions, you get an idea of what I'm talking about. As a conservative, are you more confident arguing the premise I just articulated in my answers to those 8 questions, or the phony fairness premise of the American left? That's what I thought. All too often, we accept the premise of the left's argument on virtually every issue, which allows them to frame the political battlefield. Any good general will attempt to shape the battlefield in a manner that gives his soldiers the best chance at victory. And we should do the same in the culture war as well. Could you imagine the possibilities if we made the left defend the constitutionality, see that as legality, of all their status schemes, and if our Republican politicians asked questions that rejected their premise from the outset? I get asked questions all the time from the left's perspective, and I never accept their premise. For example, in 2011, I did an interview on Dutch national television. One of the questions was whether those who practice homosexuality should be allowed to serve openly in the military. I believe all men and women that are physically qualified and able to conform to the Uniformed Code of Military Justice ought to be able to serve their country, I replied. But what about gays and lesbians, the Dutch host asked. I'm sorry, maybe you didn't hear me, I replied. I believe all men and women that are physically qualified and able to conform to the Uniformed Code of Military Justice ought to be able to serve their country. Now the host looked confused. So is that a yes or a no, he asked me. There are only two types of people, I told him. Men and women. He had nowhere to go after that because I totally shut his premise down by rejecting it from the outset. From there, I was on offense throughout the rest of the interview. Recently, I was asked by a newspaper reporter to comment on a story he was working on regarding the perception conservatives have a monopoly on the American flag and patriotism. The story centered around a liberal activist who was sewing into an American flag an anti-marriage, pro-immorality speech by Hillary Clinton as a protest against this perceived bias. Do you think the American flag is seen as a conservative symbol, he asked me. I answered, the American flag is a symbol of the virtues and values the generation that devised it and died for it intended it to be, which they enshrined for future generations in the Declaration of Independence and U.S. Constitution. Those virtues and values should defy labels except American. Unfortunately, as we cascade over the postmodern cliff, all such absolutes are now considered negotiable. Do you think it's appropriate to incorporate the flag into progressive liberal messages like a pro-gay marriage art project, he followed up. I think our society is better off when we conform our beliefs to the virtues and values that define the American flag rather than conforming what the flag stands for to suit our own personal whims, desires, and agendas, I answered. What's your response to the claim that conservatives have an unfair monopoly on the flag, he asked for his final question. It's clear from their own writings and actions what values and virtues our founders intended the flag to stand for. There is a God, our rights come from him, and the purpose of government is to protect those God-given rights. That's how I responded. I went on to say, that vision should transcend our current petty political labeling, and if your particular agenda doesn't reconcile with that uniquely American vision, the problem is you, not the vision. Nowhere in this dialogue did I accept the premise of the questioning, which was that the country is so divided that we have multiple interpretations of traditional Americana. Nothing could be further from the truth, for we do not get to interpret the meanings of such things when the authors themselves left such a clear record of what they meant. That is social reconstructionism, and if I accept the premise of these questions, I am accepting the validity of that pagan and un-American philosophy, which means we never arrive at the truth and just keep arguing our own perspectives. If the leftists want to make the case what they believe is in line with the founding vision of these United States, then by all means, go back into the historical record and make that case. Except they won't, because they can't. There's a simple reason why the left doesn't pay as much homage to the founding of this country as we do. And it's because most of what they believe is contrary to it, which is why they've had to take over the schools and scrub that history from the textbooks. Even one of the left's favorite founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, was so conservative compared to most liberals, they'd peg him with their favorite word for conservatives nowadays, extreme. Proving yet again that whichever side's premise is argued in the argument always wins was McCain-Palin in 2008. During each of the debates that year, including the vice presidential showdown between Sarah Palin and Joe Biden, the Democrats argued the economic collapse happening at the time was the result of too much deregulation, when the exact opposite was true. Not once in any of these debates did McCain-Palin defend the free market, and they just accepted the premise of the Democrats' phony arguments. An economic crash from too much big government resulting in President Bush insanely saying, I'll suspend free market principles to save the free market, was the perfect time for the Republican presidential ticket to take the national witness stand on behalf of free enterprise. It gave McCain-Palin a chance to triangulate between the unpopular Democrat Congress and the unpopular lame duck President Bush and channel the angst of Joe the plumber as our champions to take on the ruling class. Instead, the premise of Obama-Biden that government wasn't tinkering with our economy enough was allowed to stand. In the minds of voters, an attack unanswered or a premise unchallenged becomes true. So the American people took their cue from that and voted for more big government by voting for Obama-Biden. And they've been suffering for it ever since, proving those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Not once, but twice during the 2012 presidential debates, Mitt Romney failed to confront President Obama on his version of the events that led to 4 dead Americans at the Benghazi terrorist attacks. Romney allowed Obama's false premise to be asserted on the biggest stage of the campaign, thus allowing what should have been an issue that toppled the Obama presidency to become a strength prior to voters heading to the polls. It wasn't until after the election and congressional hearings featuring several Benghazi whistleblowers, all of whom worked for Obama, that the president's account proved to be false. By then, though, it was too late, and those 4 dead Americans and their families still have yet to receive justice as of the time this book was written. One of the reasons we see so many Republicans accepting the premise of the left's argument is because they don't possess a solid worldview. Thus, most Republicans end up being defined by what they're against and not what they're for. Without a premise, they're just playing defense and often end up opposing things like homosexuals marrying because it's icky, not because they have any principled basis for doing so. Once the left exposes that, they cave on a moral issue like marriage because they can be exposed as hypocrites for their own private sexual behavior. Heck, most Republicans don't know what they're for beyond their forbidding Democrats. The left is always advancing its premise, and too many Republicans don't have one, which means unless we the people step in, we end up allowing liberals to frame the argument. We can step in when it comes to voting, but at some point we need to actually elect politicians who can advance our premise in the arena of public policy. Otherwise, we'll continue going forward over the cliff the left has us headed towards. The only debate will be how fast over that cliff we go.
And that was Chapter 4 of Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that abortion is power for men.